Howdy, everyone, and welcome to our presentation. We are going to cover our journey of developing a retention and workflow policy for the Texas Data Repository, or TDR. Here are the TDR liaisons and members of the Data Retention Working Group: Santi, Laura, Christina, Andrea, Michael, and Juan. Some background information about us. We are a part of the Texas Digital Library, a consortium of academic libraries in Texas, providing shared technology services that support secure and reliable access to digital collections of research and scholarship since 2005. Texas Digital Library builds capacity among its membership for ensuring access to and preservation of digital content. Our members fund us, govern us, and provide oversight and direction, but we rely on member committees to power our work. Hosted by the Texas Digital Library, the Texas Data Repository, or TDR, is a platform for publishing and managing data sets and other data products, those created by faculty, staff, and students at member institutions. The repository is built in an open source application called the Dataverse software, developed and used by Harvard University. Currently, 13 institutions participate in the TDR. Each participating university has its own branded Dataverse collection within the overall repository. The TDR Steering Committee is the mechanism for member institutions to provide the Texas Digital Library with feedback and to make decisions about TDR services. The purpose of the committee is to provide strategic planning, support, and policy oversight to guide the direction of programs and services. Membership consists of one data repository librarian from each TDR member institution, as well as the Texas Digital Library's TDR Services Manager. The steering committee has the discretion to establish working groups. Relevant to this talk, 2 new working groups were formed last year with the goal of providing steering with information about the growth of the TDR at our next annual meeting. The Data Retention Group, made up of the presenters of this talk, and another working group who are investigating large-size data archiving and preservation. Several members are on both working groups since the actions of one group greatly impact the other. With the upcoming 10-year anniversary of the Texas Data Repository, the TDR Steering Committee saw a need to create a data retention policy that would inform long-term preservation and access to research data. This work is needed because the TDR does not have unlimited resources, making it necessary to develop a policy that articulates practical expectations for long-term stewardship for all partners. To accomplish its charge, the working group divided its tasks into 4 phases. Each phase has a specific focus and set of deliverables. In the following slides, we will review highlights from phases 1 through 3 and discuss what is to come in phase 4. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Juan.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. I'm Xuan. I'll go over first and second phases of developing the data retention policies and workflows for TDR with you all. To set a foundation for any future research data retention criteria recommendations, our group conducted 2 environmental scans during phase 1. One scan focused on developing an understanding of any federal, state agencies or founders or university data retention requirements that could inform a retention period for TDR. The other environmental scan aimed to understand how other Dataverse instances have incorporated data retention workflows or practices. To complete this work, the group reviewed the literature on public-facing websites to compile data for analysis. Our group found that out of 34 federal, state, and university institutions reviewed, 7 may have a formal policy that explicitly addresses research data retention, meaning they have a policy that mentions some form of a retention period. We also reviewed 11 Dataverse instances and found that 3 had articulated data retention time periods. and many other address components of data retention in some areas of their website or documentation. Generally, three most popular time periods articulated. The first is none or not found any particular period. The second is keep data for a minimum of 3 years. And the third would be keep data for a minimum of 10 years. The group also noticed that data retention and broader records retention policies are often intermingled and don't seem to be two different processes and policies. For example, some institutions are relying on overarching record retention policies due to lack of data retention policy. This is just reinforced the idea that as institutions develop rich data retention policies, there is a need to have libraries at the table as we have knowledge to add to retention policy development. Here's the conclusions we made during our phase 1 activities. That there will be distinct data retention periods for published and unpublished datasets. For published datasets in the databases, 10 years from publication date of latest version of the dataset in TDR will be considered retirement eligible. And for unpublished datasets and databases, 5 years from latest version to the dataset or dataverse in TDR will be considered. Phase 2 focused on understanding the connections between research data retention policies and practices and TDR, specifically on two aspects. First, dataverse functionality. Second, digital preservation policy and workflows. To conduct the work of this phase, the group reviewed existing documentation on TDR and dataverse functionality, TDR digital preservation policy, and Chronopolis documentation. After review, we found several recommendations that address the potential rich data retention review criteria, policy updates, and desired features and functionality in future TDR dataverse releases. In terms of our recommendations for dataverse functionality, here are some of the highlights. We recommended that the minimum amount of storage space used before an institution really needs to worry about not storing indefinitely is 75%. If the space is used over 75% of the storage, change the admin status by warning and it will go to the library admin team. For the data retention policies, we recommend to have different policies for publishing and unpublishing dataset. However, same policy should be applied to all users and schools. These only kick in under certain circumstances, and the implementation should be individualized. In terms of the dataset publishing status, for published file, we recommend to use a 10 years data retention rule, and for unpublished file, we would use a 5-year data retention rule. In terms of whether to keep the files published by those inactive users after the retention period defined by TDR later, we recommend we only worry if the datasets are retirement eligible. We can reach out 2 years prior to the deaccession day. If we cannot find the user, then TDR has the right to decide. We also recommend to develop FAQs for departing deposit regarding data retention policies. We also investigated with the TDR task force on large datasets for possible research-funded storage options. For the period of data retention for large datasets be tied to payment for data storage, users may need to pay if it is a large dataset. Recommendations for future TDR digital preservation services include decision-making criteria for data retention. Specifically, decision-making criteria included criteria referenced in the current TDR digital preservation guidelines, such as rich data associated with publications, in alignment with funding agency and/or institutional expectations for rich data preservation. The inclusion of these criteria would ensure that retention practices align with preservation process and policies. We also have recommendations for curation activities. That means it will also be important for TDR steering committee members to be aware of datasets that require a special tool to render or reuse, influence future curation practices. Also, any retention recommendations that might require removal of content from TDR should align with Chronopolis workflows and cost if needed. Finally, data retention process could influence some components of the current TDR data preservation policies, including what happens when datasets are updated and a new version are generated. And next, I'll turn over the slides to my colleague, Christina.
Thank you, Xuan. We are currently in phase 3 of our action plan. We began in late January and hope to finish in April. The goals of this phase are to establish criteria for deaccessioning datasets and to develop effective communication strategy to convey data retention policy to TDR colleagues and TDR users. Our main goal for this phase is to establish what criteria make a dataset eligible for deaccessioning, taking into consideration recommendations from phases 1 and 2. So far, we have decided that there will be distinct review periods and criteria for published and unpublished datasets. Currently, we are leaning towards having unpublished datasets for a minimum of 5 years and published datasets for a minimum of 10 years. We have divided the factors we are considering into 4 groups: usage, cost or space, publications, and reusability. We are still in the process of deciding what the criteria for each factor is. For example, if the dataset is smaller than a certain size, it is probably not worth the time and effort to review and deaccession it, but we haven't decided yet whether that size would be 100 megabytes, 1 gigabyte, or 5 gigabytes. We're also in the process of deciding the combination of triggered criteria, or the order of importance for different factors that could trigger review and possible deaccessioning. We are likely to deaccession a dataset that was deposited over 10 years ago by a user that can't be found, that is over 10 gigs, has never been downloaded, has no README, and files that we can't figure out how to open. And we are likely to keep a dataset that was deposited 10 years ago but updated 2 years ago, has been downloaded 200 times and cited 25 times, that has good metadata, including links to 1 grant and 2 and 3 publications. But what about the data sets that fall in between these two extremes? That's what we're working through right now. Each of the TDR schools has very different needs and resources. Some schools at their current deposit rates will not run out of space for more than 100 years. Others have already used more than double of their original allotments. So even though the criteria for data sets to be eligible for deaccessioning will be standard across all of TDR, how and when the deaccessioning process is implemented is done individually at each institution with the following recommendations. When an institution has reached 75% of their space allotment, they should start the process of identifying eligible datasets. And no dataset should be deaccessioned without notifying the contact for the dataset. To this end, we hope to develop tools to help our institutions with this process. For instance, we are trying to build a tool to predict how much space an institution's data will use so they can begin planning for possible deaccessioning at the appropriate time. Factors that might go into this model include how much data is being deposited each year and whether that increases over time, how many data sets are being published, and whether depositors update or publish their data when notified about deaccessioning, or whether less restrictive criteria are used. We want to see if we can develop scripts using the Dataverse API that can identify datasets and contacts for those datasets that meet eligibility requirements or a combination of requirements. And then we want to develop communication tools to make sure that depositors are aware that their data might be deaccessioned. This might include a box that users mark when creating an account or depositing a dataset. It might include having a metadata field that allows depositors to choose a minimum retention period. It might be sending automated emails that inform the contact criteria that make their data set at risk for deaccessioning and how they might be able to change that. We know that some of these tools we cannot develop ourselves, so that leaves us to our 4th phase.
1 minute, 1 minute.
For phase 4, we hope to have a policy to make recommendations to TDR and Harvard Dataverse. We hope to spend April and May wrapping up our project so that we can share a report with the TDR Steering Committee at our annual in-person meeting at the Texas Conference on Digital Libraries. I'm going to hand it back over to Laura.
It is not feasible to keep all data for all time. While some data might be reusable for years, other data might be very time-specific or quickly become outdated. We are hoping to find a balance between helping our users meet funding requirements to provide access to their data, but also make manageable the financial and workload burdens of our member institutions. Hopefully, our journey can assist others who are facing the same issues our depository is facing. If other people are going through this process, we are eager to hear what challenges and solutions you have. Thank you.
And thank you. And next is Nina Exner from Virginia Commonwealth University presenting on working with the Grants Research Enterprise, no controlled vocabulary for jargon.
I can find all of the buttons. Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. I'm Nina Exner. And my slides, if you want to get a reader's copy, is at osf.io/D6KSF. This is a pretty text-heavy set of slides, assuming that you're going to come back later to read about the jargon. I'm Nina Exner, Dr. Exner at the Research Data Librarian at Virginia Commonwealth University, located in Richmond, Virginia. I'm a solo data librarian supporting a medical and a non-medical campus. We have about 30,000 students, but since I'm talking about the research enterprise, what actually matters there is we had 464 million in grants last year. It's a very different perspective thinking from the research enterprise point of view. So, what the heck is a research enterprise? It's a piece of jargon, a term, to talk about all of the grant and actually also patent getting machine on a campus. It includes a whole lot of different people, such as PIs, or principal investigators, which we might normally call faculty, key personnel, which is researcher staff like data managers and biostatisticians that are not the leads on research. It includes campus administrators like the ADRs, or Associate Deans of Research, and VPRs or VCRs, not in Betamax. VPRs are Vice Presidents of Research. And the group that I'm hoping that you'll consider working with, if you have not already been working with them, the research administrators, internationally called research managers, who are the staff who administer or help to administer grants. Staff are always very neglected on academic campuses because everything is about students or else faculty. And so I really hope that you will take this as some social interoperability, trademarked OCLC, not really, some social interoperability inspiration to talk to research administrators. These are very much not the same people as the associate deans of research. The reason that I say there's no controlled vocabulary is, though, we all know interoperability depends on some ontological mapping, some crosswalking or understanding, but our jargon and even the faculty's way of talking about their research tends not to match up perfectly with research administration jargon, which tends to really be driven by how the feds, the NIHs, the NSFs, the DOEs talk about research stuff. There's not really a thesaurus to help that, so we have to keep all of that interoperability in our heads. For those of you that haven't had a chance to do that, here are some ideas. For those of you that already do this really well, sorry, go get a coffee. When I talk to research administrators, if I go to places that are research administrator rich, and that they expect mostly as research administrator to research administrator, like their professional conferences, here are the things they ask in much the same way I might say, so are you a data curator running a repository, or are you a data trainer? Research administrators start by asking each other, so hey, are you pre-award or post-award? What that means is, one of the first ways that research administration is organized is the people who deal with the processes until the award of a grant, and that is to say, writing a grant or a proposal, technically, and submitting it to the grant funding agency. And then the processes that happen after a grant is awarded to just the awarded grant. So they don't work with as many total grants, as many DMPs. It's fairly divided for a lot of people. This workflow, there's a big time gap there, and they're very different processes. The other way that research administration professionals ask each other about each other is, are you central or departmental? The central office is a lot of times what you'll traditionally think of as the grant administration machine. Your campus probably doesn't call it the Office of Research, but it's the Office of Research. My campus calls it OVPRI. My previous campus called it DORED. It's the people who veto grants if they're not done right, because some things have to be done centrally. But there are also departmental offices. Departmental research administrators work in a school or college or center or department. They work more directly with the PIs, and they may be more finance oriented, or they may be helping with grant writing, but they're focused in the subjects. So that's really different than the central grants office. There's certainly overlap depending on your campus. There's no one true way this kind of thing happens. And there are also other professionals like me that like to hang out at these conferences. One of those groups that sometimes shows up at research administration places and usually answers to the same overboss as the research administrators is ethics and compliance professionals. So in addition to the pre-award, post-award, central and departmental groups, the other group I'd like you to think about is ethics and compliance, because they have a lot of overlap with data. Just because you've talked to an ethics and compliance person doesn't mean you've talked to the rest of the grants office, or the Office of Research. And just because you've talked to people in the Office of Research doesn't mean, even though they answer to the same people, that you've talked to the ethics and compliance people. They're really pretty siloed. Like, I don't work with acquisitions a whole lot in my library. The same thing there. Ethics and pre-award may not work together a whole lot, even though they hang out in the same department. When I say ethics and compliance, this is at least IRB and research integrity and misconduct. No matter how small your campus is, you probably got those two. If you have any grant-funded graduate research assistants, you probably also have research ethics education. So those are 3 different groups in the ethics silo. In addition, there's also biosafety, which can have some data overlap, but not a whole lot. And IACUC for animals also can actually get involved with the library quite a lot, but it's not as likely to resonate with you. I highly recommend talking to those training-focused research ethics education people. If you can, search on your website for RCR, or Responsible Conduct of Research, or maybe RECR if you're an NSF campus, because the legislation decided that we just needed one more piece of terminology. Traditionally, they have talked about things like data fabrication and data falsification, and how to manage your data better so that you don't have that temptation to fabricate just that one data point. But recently, there's been just a huge amount of other data handling topics in the research ethics education, particularly using lab notebooks, electronic lab notebooks, and balancing security and data sharing. So this is a great time to ask them, hey, have you got any new regulations you need some help with training on? Also, you probably have an IRB, and if you're at a larger campus, you will also have an Office of Human Research Protection that you might call the IRB office, but really technically is not the IRB office. They're the Human Research Protection Office or something like. Their data interests tend to include de-identification and secure storage, but also balancing participant privacy versus participants' interest or desire for data sharing back to the community of similar participants and thinking about that balance. They're a little less education oriented than the RCR folks, but they would often really like to talk about standard operating procedures and protocols and data retention. I didn't expect that to come up, but data retention is often a big deal to the IRB and the Human Research Protection Office, because they need policies that they can hand to people and say, here is the policy you're supposed to reference in your IRB protocol. So that may be a very different kind of outreach. All right. I left these guys till last, research development, because the fewest campuses will have them, but they're actually my favorite. This is people who are just working to get more grants through lots of different techniques. It's a relatively new growing profession. It overlaps with faculty development because their goal is training faculty to get better. But faculty development offices, usually that's a slightly different jargon. They're really talking about teaching skills. So research development in the US at least is going to be and Canada actually, but less in the UK and EU. They use a little different arrangement with faculty training. Sorry, I got distracted there. Research development tends to include grant writing training, organizing large multidisciplinary teams, and educating faculty, as well as something called limited submissions that may be less interesting to you. What's RDM about them is because they're sort of focused between individual grant writing help and big campus skills growth, they're going to be really interested in education around writing DMPs and DMSPs and making sure that that agrees with the grant instead of what we have all seen recently, or what we all have always seen of DMPs that have nothing to do with the actual project plan. But also data management advice for complex interdisciplinary teams that have trouble coordinating. And they may even be interested in reproducibility for training grants if you're an NIH campus. They also have just tons of library overlap outside of data. So if you search on your campus to see whether you have a research development professional or team, that's a great people to say, I really would like to do some trainings that are more incorporated in campus grant training. Please let me work with you. And I skipped forward to the next slide. Why am I even talking about grants jargon? I hope you'll understand better what your grant colleagues, your research office colleagues are talking about when they talk, but especially use this jargon. Use jargon that helps people to understand what you mean. As a very short sentence example, I usually say data management plans are a pre-award activity, but they're going to require post-award compliance. Now, you all already knew that. It should be obvious, right? But it's not always obvious to people when they're just trying to get their stupid plan put in that they're actually going to have to do something post-award.
One minute.
Thank you, Matt. I'll try to stay under 1 minute. So, for example, when I did my overview of NIH data management sharing plans, it's organized with grant-centered phases: proposal development, pre-award or award submission, just in time, which no one cared about until recently, except the IRB people, or award negotiation stage, and then post-award and closeout. By labeling my stages in the stages of a proposal / award, it helps those staff kind of see where do they fit into the DMSP process. It's also helpful to use the right terms when you're Googling on your campus website. So instead of just looking for grant people, try searching for RCR, research development, and so on. And that is time. I just heard a click. So thank you so much. If you want to talk with me later on, please feel free to reach out.
That was great. Thank you. All right. Now we will hear from Lisa Johnston and Tom Jordan from the University of Wisconsin-Madison presenting Joining Together, Developing a Campus Data Integration Standard. All yours.
All right, thank you so much, Matt. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Johnston. I'm the Director of Data Governance at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And actually joining me today, Tom is going to kick us off.
Hi, folks. My name is Tom Jordan. I'm a solutions architect in the central IT organization at UW-Madison. And we're going to talk a little bit about our data integration standards. So I'll apologize in advance. A lot of this is going to talk about administrative data systems. I know that this is a research data conference. We hope there's some overlap, but if not, hopefully you'll find it entertaining. So this story really started a couple of years ago as we knew we were going to be moving the organization to Workday for HR and finance. This is probably a common story among some of you, and realized that we had about 1,000 systems on campus that consumed HR financial information in some way and needed to be touched as a part of this migration. That really made us look closely at the integration space and how we approach it. You can see kind of the hodgepodge of systems that we've got here together, the way that information is integrated within those, and a really just like kind of web of fragile and delicate system integrations that were crafted by hand over many, many years. So trying to take 1,000 of these things from where we are to where we were in the future, our CIO, Lois Brooks, was really forward thinking and saying, let's be in a position to tell a better integration story by the time we get to Workday migration. Next slide, please, Lisa. So in the process of approaching this, we built out a lot of technology infrastructure to be able to move integration from an art form to a utility service, really getting into the idea of building out integration platforms and well-defined APIs and things like that to make it clear to the community when you need this type of data, here's where we'd like you to plug in, here's how we'd like you to interact with it, and things like that. Surprisingly, as we do many, many times, we led with technology and then kind of like got into the governance and policy pieces. And we're really as a campus now in the mid stages, I would say, of starting to understand, create policy around integration and standard and like data governance standards around integration. Before I dive into that, though, Lisa will give you a little bit of background around the data governance landscape at UW-Madison.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So luckily, we have a program on our campus to really help us think about how to connect our data, kind of like the slide that Tom just showed. We're trying to be the city planners of all the data and how it flows across campus into all of our different systems into the hands of our data users. So our data governance program is really situated to bring the responsible owners of that data together, the individuals who have key subject matter expertise, like our research offices that Nina was just discussing, but also data privacy, risk analysis, cybersecurity, all the various ways that we really have to comply with data regulation, but also how do we as an institution want to behave? What role do we want to have in the management of data on our campus and the protection of the individuals in those data? So our data governance program really focuses on the people, the technology, and the processes to manage our data and to help our data users really trust that data and then responsibly use it in ways that is really going to comply with all of those expectations. So in this space of data integration, really trying to think about how does our data move across all of our different data domains in the HR, in the finance world, in the research compliance spaces. One of the tools that we use to address this problem is policy. So our University of Wisconsin, we actually have an institutional data policy that was just recently implemented in 2021. I know many of your campuses also have similar data policies. Our policy really tries to speak to potential users of data and to help people understand what their role is, what are their responsibilities. And an aspect of that policy gave somewhat vague guidance in terms of what to do with integration. Integration in our policy sense is the recommendation is to source data from systems of record or systems of reference. And that typically means from the system where the data is housed. So in HR, we have a central HR data system. That's the system of record. Or you might get that data from a warehouse where the data is modeled and managed a little bit differently. But essentially, we're asking people to not create additional copies of data. That creates additional risk. If you're downloading a whole bunch of data from these source systems, modeling it yourself and changing it, that just creates a second, perhaps unregulated copy, and it's really hard to keep track of, and it's also hard to secure it if we keep lots of different places. And then finally, this is the big one that we needed to address: follow university standards for integrations. So what are those standards? So in order to supplement our overarching policy, the Data Governance Council launched a team in 2022 to really dig into what could those standards be for really helping people effectively manage the flow of our institutional data from those source systems, those systems of record, to those 900, 1,000 downstream ancillary systems that Tom mentioned. The goal for this group was also to create an implementation plan. How could this standard be really rolled out to help both existing standards, but also new standards, or I'm sorry, new integrations as they are appearing to really meet the standard and to evaluate these integrations over time. So we brought together a cross-campus team of people from the IT sectors, from campus integration specialists who are doing integrations for the library or for different departments. We brought in specialized data stewards who are the ones that really understand the data that's flowing, who really monitoring both the regulations for how we treat that data, but also how did we collect it? What are some considerations that might come into play if we collected that data under certain conditions or terms. And then the data governance side, as well as enterprise architecture. So a large group of folks to really dig into this. And Tom?
Mm-hmm. So of course, with any exercise like this, the first thing that you really discover is where the challenges are. One of the first ones was just how broad this space is. So the team really had to think about, what are the criteria we're going to use for when we care and when we don't care. And a lot of that got into where is our high-risk data flowing and what is the operational impact of an integration being disrupted. So considering how diligently do we have to protect the data that's flowing through that integration, and then what's the overall impact if that integration fails. The second challenge we ran into is that there's, on our campus, there are different apparatus for data governance than for IT and technology governance. And so we needed to recognize that in this space in particular, there's a tremendous amount of overlap there. We want to encourage people to use particular types of interfaces that have particular characteristics to protect the data and to eliminate or reduce data replication. And doing so requires us to dip into the IT space and say, we'd like you to do it this way or that way, or things like that. And so we're really finding that, we need both communities present in order to be successful with this. And then finally, there's the element of research, of institutional support for these standards. When we need to deploy new artifacts in our environment, how are those resourced? How do we gain agreement that those are the canonical resources to be able to record data about integrations and things like that? And I'll talk in the next slide a little bit about strategy. So next slide, Lisa. We really focused around the idea of understanding integration providers, integration consumers as different groups on our campus, going back to what we talked about with sourcing from systems of record or systems of reference, those people that and services that provide data to others on our campus. We established some responsibilities around there. Providers are responsible for defining the appropriate sources and approved uses for each source. This gives them an opportunity to say that, like, this API, this interface, this set of data tables, these are what we intend them to be used for, and these are what we do not intend them to be used for. So there is clarity around expectations. Consumers' responsibilities are to source data from the right place. And of course, in order for them to do that, we have to tell them what the right place is. I'll touch on that in a moment. And then, of course, the documentation that goes into defining that, which we're still working through at this point. Guidelines for use of institutional data integration. The challenge here was really around mapping our existing data standards to the integration space. So we have a data authorization standard that talks about how people get access to data and what they're allowed to do when they have that access. But thinking through the lens of integration means we have to think about not just the developer that's doing that integration and pulling that data into an application, but then what do the users of the application see and what can they do with that data? And so we're working on establishing some technical standards to support the data authorization standard that allows things like capturing security metadata and making it clear in that security metadata what is the risk level of information being transmitted and what roles should have access to it and things like that. And then finally, managing the data integrations themselves involves the idea of understanding what's out there in the community, what has integrated with what, so that when we have a major change in our IT ecosystem or our data ecosystem, for example, replacing our HR and financial systems with a new cloud-based package, we have some idea of who may be impacted and how they may be impacted, that we're not starting from zero with a complete refresh of our entire application portfolio in order to be able to start to assess impacts. Let's go to the next slide. So this is just an example of our integration catalog. There'll be a link at the end of the slides that you can follow to check this out and understand what data we present. I'll say that this is what you'll find is a lot of this is focused on our Workday migration because that's been a substantial campus priority. We intend to extend this beyond those things. And we also, in the integration catalog space at least, are looking for a more comprehensive platform to be able to host this type of information. So this is the next up is the API catalog. And this is just an example of some of the person API that we provide that delivers base person information about a person and their roles relative to the institution. You can kind of see just at a high level what those things look like. But then we can go to the last slide. And Lisa, is there anything else that you wanted to cover that we might not have hit?
Just that our standard is published. You can take a look at the final product now. We also include that link to the integrations catalog. And I think really the next step is to continue to look toward the future as we develop more and more institutional data products that we want people to use. How do we advertise them in such a way that people will really, take advantage of those products, but also consider, how to apply them and implement them in such a way that will best serve the people and the data that we're managing. So it's an ongoing adventure, I think. But yep, thank you so much. I think that's last slide from us.
Wow, thank you, everybody. This was a great session. I think every presentation, there's something I'm like, oh yeah, oh yeah. Like I can just connecting all these dots. This is wonderful. Well, we are at our question and answers time. We've got about 15 minutes, maybe 14, to answer the questions. I do still have some open questions in the Q&A. I'll read them off and then I'll present them to our panelists. They are all welcome to, start their cameras up and join the conversation. Okay. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I really want to thank all of our presenters today. Nina, Lisa, Tom, Christina, Laura, Xuan, all of you. This was really great. By the way, just for disclosure, I also am a part of a Dataverse repository, so I really took a lot from that presentation. We are in the middle of working on our research data policy for our university, and we certainly collaborate with our research enterprise. I know some of my colleagues are on this call today, so I've really found this super valuable. I'm actually going to go back and rewatch the recording of this presentation because there's so much information. Thank you all for attending. I believe our stream is closing down for the day, but you can jump over to the new member session. I think that starts at 4 p.m. Eastern time. The link is available in FeedLoop if you're looking for it. But with that, I think we're all done. Congratulations, everybody. Yay for RDAP day 1.
Thanks, Matt.
You bet.
Take care all.
Thank you, everyone.